Zimbabwe cash crisis worse.
Talking about Venezuela once again.
Systemic important banks. They removed the one factor thing on there called monetary awareness. Hey there, hope all is well. Back at you today with some more RT News updates. And as you can tell from today's title, we're going to be talking about a major problem, an $82 trillion problem that Washington has completely stopped talking about. And it's important to really take a look into this problem because it has to do with the fact that 74 million baby boomers will be impacted by this problem. And it has to do with Social Security and Medicare and the fact that both of them are causing major problems in our economy. And no one in Washington is willing to even talk about it because it's going to be such a tough subject to deal with today and in the days ahead. But before I dive into today's articles, as always, I want to encourage you to click the subscribe button along with the notification tab to be informed of future RTD live talks as well as news updates and interviews. But more importantly, I want you to visit me on steamit.com where I post articles throughout the day on matters that I'm not able to cover via video. And also, if you are new to RTD altogether, I want to encourage you to visit the RTD University page where I put together all my prior interviews dealing with monetary matters, fiscal policy, as well as the importance of having sound money in your possession today to avoid situations which our baby boomers will face in the days ahead. So let's dive into today's articles. So as I mentioned, I have a couple articles I want to share with you. Before I dive into those articles, as always, in this picture here is quite interesting how this gentleman here is sitting on the White House lawn with a sign in reference to just debt overall, but not really taking into consideration himself. I'm sure that the Social Security and Medicare and all the entitlement spending in general has become a problem for our nation. And at some point, there will be a day of reckoning where those expenditures will no longer be able to be covered by our government. Since this whole tax reform is coming to play, our deficits have gone up, tax receipts have gone down. So the gap between what we've promised and what we bring in will continue to widen. And that means the deficits will continue to explode. And it's just a matter of time before the world decides to turn their back on lending money to our country, knowing that we will never be able to live up to our obligations. So as always, I want to scan the surface, give you an idea of what's going on, and at the very end, share with you my thoughts on this whole matter and how I believe that regardless of anyone wanting to talk about this subject matter, there's no way of avoiding this fiscal collapse that's going to come because of situations just like this. And so I think it's better to begin talking about these things now, and as well as informing as many baby boomers and retirees as we can on this matter, because they are the ones that are expecting to receive these payouts in their lifetime, whereas in the younger generation, millennials and those that are younger, are still able to prepare themselves for the retirement concept if they choose to go that route by being more fiscally responsible for themselves and not being so dependent upon entitlements as well as the conventional financial assets that they've been taught will be there when they get older. So let's dive into today's articles. So the very first one here is from Fiscal Times, and it says the 82 trillion problem Washington has stopped talking about. And so, give you an idea what's going on inside of this article here. It says, now that the anti-deficit hysteria of the Great Recession has given way to a backlash of complacency, lawmakers and the public are ignoring an 82 trillion avalanche of Social Security and Medicare deficits coming over the next few decades, warns Brian Riddle of the conservative Manhattan Institute. It says, how did we get here? It says conservatives used to prioritize long-term fiscal solvency. Then Donald Trump won 88% of the Republican voters and the presidency while pledging that there will be no cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. 6 months later, a Pew poll reveals that only 15% of Republicans support trimming Medicare and only 10% support Social Security reform. Says today, concerns about Social Security and Medicare are dismissed, the dying voice of the out-of-touch Washington establishment. Says, why does it matter? This complacency could be catastrophic, Riddle argues. Social Security and Medicare reform has fallen off the radar precisely when it is the most urgent. Then it goes on to say, over the next 30 years, according to the data from the Congressional Budget Office, Medicare will run a 40 trillion cash deficit. 40 trillion. Social Security will run a 19 trillion cash deficit, and the interest on the resulting program from debt will be 23 trillion. Even readers inclined to be skeptical of a 30-year projection should take this one seriously, since future inflation rates are indeed anyone's guess, but the existence of 74 million baby boomers retiring into Social Security and Medicare is an actual reality. So just the fact he mentions about questioning what inflation may be, as I reported prior videos, inflation will be an issue, and so that all plays into this whole idea that this problem needs to be addressed sooner than later. It says, but those details hardly matter in an environment where both politicians and the public prefer not to have a conversation about Social Security and Medicare at all. It says neither party wants to sign up for a suicide mission, especially if the other party is not on board, Riddle. So here we have the foundation being laid for how serious of a problem this is. Even if you look ahead 30 years, as the projection says here, $40 trillion for Medicare, $19 trillion for Social Security are numbers that are beyond comprehension, because our national debt as of now is only $21 trillion. And so there's no way on God green earth that we will be able to go that far in a deficit spending where it will be trillions of dollars before something happens. And so just that alone lets you know that this problem is going to be dealt with in some form or fashion in the next 5 to 10 years, in my opinion, because there's no way that this tax reform causing the deficit spending to increase is going to allow entitlement spending to become that much more of an issue outside of our day-to-day expenditures by our government. So information definitely worth taking note of.
The next recession.
Recession will be.
Will be a recession.
We're going to hit a recession.
The date of the next recession.
A U.S.-only recession typically lasts 8 to 10 months, but a lot of things about this particular one have not been typical. So
a crash is coming. Now, whether it's 6 months from now, 12 months, 36 months, no one knows.
I go to bed every night, I dream of another recession. If you know what to do, if you have the right plan to set up, you can make a lot of money from this.
So here's the next article here, and it's entitled "War is Coming, Panic Over Impending Social Security Crisis." And give you an idea what's going on here, it says war is coming. It says this one will not be traditional type of war. This conflict will be fought inside the borders of the United States between foes of different birth years, armed with little more than outrage and hyperbole. The primary battlefield will be Social Security and Medicare, because their programs collectively represent commitments that dwarf the nation's $20 trillion debt. It says, on the surface, it is difficult to blame the baby boomers for Social Security or Medicare, both of which predate the boomers' ability to vote. It says the last major expanse of the Social Security occurred in 1971, when the oldest boomers were just 25. It says, likewise, the structural trouble with Social Security preceded the boomers' coming of age by decades. It says, in fact, Social Security would have skidded into insolvency decades back without the baby boom. The problem with Social Security isn't demographics, it's politics. In 1944, A.J. Altmeyer, who headed the Social Security Board, warned Congress, it's a mathematical certainty that the longer the present payroll tax rate remains in effect, the higher the future payroll taxes must be. Basically, his warning can be reduced to this: hey, Congress, it isn't possible to sell dollars for dimes forever. And then the gentleman who wrote this, he is a baby boomer. Then he goes on to talk about how, in this part here, about how certain legislation and certain laws played into the reality that we're facing now with this whole crisis, and that it's not even the baby boomers' fault. They happen to be born at a time where there was just a massive amount of births in our country, and they be the recipients of what was promised to their parents. And so it says, for full disclosure, I am a boomer and fully admit that we have let the beast that our parents created grow untethered. It says, we have a crisis rapidly approaching. We can bicker over who is to blame, or we can start thinking about how to deal with a disaster that is approaching with mathematical certainty. It says, regardless of where you plan to retire, the number one factor in ensuring that you can retire on your terms is a 401k. And so just to back up a little bit and go over this article here, the idea that this entire baby boomer generation, 74 million expected in the next couple of years, were happen to be born at a time where this situation was already brewing. And as you see from that quote from the congressman who mentioned that there's going to be a mathematical problem in the days ahead anyway, and this was written back in 1944. And so it was already baked into the cake that this was going to be a problem. And the idea of current payroll taxes not being sufficient enough. So there was always going to be a need for higher tax rates as time goes along, just to keep pace with the amount of baby boomers entering retirement. So the idea of Social Security and Medicare was an idea that wasn't well thought out. And the solution was never even put into play on how it would play out decades from the time it was implemented. And so the idea that the gentleman concludes with saying that it's your responsibility to take care of yourself and that you should put your money in a 401k is advice that is also conventional and mainstream, but yet Also factoring in a market downturn, that 401k can be heavily impacted as well. So at the end of the day, there is no true safe haven in regards to dealing with fiat currency. So the only way of protecting yourself is to educate yourself on matters such as this, and then do things outside of the conventional line of thinking and look at precious metals as a way of storing some of your wealth for uncertain times such as this. So more information if you're interested in reading for yourself. So the next article here is from The Atlantic and says, this is what life without retirement savings look like. And so it's a very lengthy piece, and it has to do with a young lady or retired lady. She's 74 years old out in California, and she's basically sharing her life story as to how things have become so tough for her because she wasn't aware of the importance of saving when she was younger. And so she's dependent upon Social Security, and just it talks about her day-to-day life and how she's struggling as of now in California. And give you an idea of what's going on here, it says, it quotes her as saying, I am a working woman again, she told me in the common room of the senior apartment complex where she now lives in California. She didn't receive a pension, and she definitely wasn't making enough money to put aside for retirement. Says now she's 76 and earns $915 a month through Social Security and SSI, and she has to also cover her roommate who died in August, the rent, which is $1,000. Says more and more older people are finding themselves in a similar situation as baby boomers reach retirement age without enough savings as housing costs and medical expenses increase. Says more people reaching retirement age don't have the pensions that lots of workers in previous generations did, and often have not put enough money into their 401ks to live off of. Says the median savings in a 401k plan for people between the age of 55 and 64 is currently just $15,000, according to the National Institute of Retirement Society. And so at the end of the day here, it basically lets you know that the current situation for most retirees and baby boomers isn't really good right now. And so depending on where you're located in this country, and especially in California, the cost of living is so expensive there, that little bit of money she receives via Social Security will not be enough. And so geographically, wherever you're located in this country, there are certain areas where the cost of living is a lot higher, which puts more of a strain in your pocket, as opposed to others, preferably down south, where it's probably a little bit cheaper, where that Social Security income can go a little further. But at the end of the day, there's going to be problems because there's going to be some type of cut in that payment eventually, or if not an outright default where people will not be receiving that at all. So more information in the story if you're interested in reading for yourself. So the last article here is from Fox News to St. Louis, and it talks about how large the deficit has grown in just over the last month, and it gives some very alarming numbers here, which plays into the whole idea that the Social Security and all these entitlements will not be available in years to come because our current fiscal situation is very dire, in the fact that we're going to continue to borrow more than can ever be repaid to our creditors outside of this country, nevertheless to be able to live up to the entitlements promised to those that are within our country. And give you some idea what's going on here, it says the new Treasury Department numbers show that the U.S. government racked up a $215 billion deficit in February, the largest monthly deficit in 6 years. Said it was also $23 billion higher than the deficit from same time last year. Says last month the federal government spent roughly $371 billion, up $7 billion from February. Says tax receipts meanwhile fell to $156 billion from $172 billion a year earlier. It says the climb back to trillion-dollar deficits, a hallmark of the financial crisis, has been hastened by policies put into place in the past several months. And so basically the idea that we haven't seen trillion-dollar deficits since the whole Great Recession started. And that was because there was so much stimulus being injected into our economy to save the too big to fail banks, as well as offering some type of security to investors as well as the current population. But yet, at the end of the day, what this all means is the fact that there is a $82 trillion monster that's growing more and more and more. And it's going to be a problem for everyone because we're all going to have to deal with this one way or another, whether it be those expecting entitlements right now as we speak, or the younger generation which bought into the narrative that there will be opportunities for them to receive some of these entitlements in their retirement age. And so at the end of the day, as you can tell here, the numbers are too large, the numbers are growing, and there's no one in Washington, D.C. willing to take on these issues because it's the equivalent of a bubble in and of itself, and just speaking about it could be the pin that pricks it, which causes an explosion within our country. And as one of the articles was entitled, A War Within Our Country, there would definitely be 74 million baby boomers that will be pissed at the fact that all that they've worked for and saved and been expecting their entire lives will not be available they're going to be mad and outraged and looking to point the blame at somebody, and it's going to be directed towards DC, but yet the younger generation will feel the outlash because our taxes will be increased dramatically in order to try to deal with some of these issues in the days ahead. So that's the news for the day. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment down below, and more importantly, share this information with your family and friends because they need to hear this information, because as this article says here, no one in DC is willing to talk about this. So I'm going to talk about it here to shine some light on this subject matter so people can become more informed and begin to become proactive in taking responsibility upon themselves to diversify themselves out of situations that will keep them from being dependent upon entitlements and whatnot that will not be there in the days ahead. So other than that, have a good one.